When you have a government that's unlawful, you violated your protection and allegiancy reciprocity, which means that they offer protection for your allegiance and vice versa. And when the government doesn't offer protection, when it's actually become more of a harassment than it has a servant, then you do not owe it any more allegiance. I'm Mandie Rose, and I am a citizen of the de jure state of North Carolina, the North Carolina American Republic. I went to court over not having an operator's license in North Carolina. I rescinded the signature on that back in April because I decided to come out of the conversion contract. And when I did, I was pulled over while driving a friend of mine's car who I was taking to get inspected and tagged. I had already had it inspected when the trooper pulled me over, and I was on the way to get it tagged and showed him that, but he wrote a ticket for operator's license being revoked, which it was not revoked, and for expired tag. 1868, the Reconstruction Acts put into abeyance the Constitution that was created by the people in 1776. And in doing so, it created a new body politic and created an unlawful government that was not subject to the same laws and the same Constitution that the people that were under the Constitution of 1776 were under. The state has not proved its lawfulness since. That's been 143 years or so now. And it refuses to enter one word of evidence saying that it is lawful. The way it applies today is anything from getting a permit to adding on to your house to having permission to drive on roads that the public owns that you help pay for is part of what's affected by all this. Not to mention your children's ability to run a lemonade stand. We won't go into that. Our fight really addresses all of these issues that the Tea Partiers are bringing up, but we're going from a legal standpoint. Instead of trying to take a system and add another party, which is, fine, having more than two parties, there's nothing wrong with, but at the same time, having to beg for your rights and having to beg for your liberty is not something that we're about, because we were guaranteed that with the Constitution, both of the United States and in North Carolina. And so return to lawful government is just about regaining the liberties that we had from the beginning and not pleading for our rights, but asserting them and doing what we're supposed to do as citizens. Well, today I was actually anticipating being called last because they usually put me off to last and either dismiss the case or just say that they're not going to hear it, which is part of the avoidance tactic that they've been using for 143 years. But today they decided to go ahead and call me up. When they did, the judge asked, without reading hardly any of my documentation, well, if this was true, then what does it matter? And I spoke a little to that. And he said, well, I deny your motion. And there was no motion on the board. And then he proceeded to go to trial. And I refused to participate because the jurisdiction that I had challenged had not been proven. And once jurisdiction has been challenged, it has to be proven by the authorities that are trying to claim jurisdiction, which would be the state of North Carolina or this situation. And once it was over, I decided to appeal, and I gave my notice of appeal to the court. And when I did, the judge put me under a $1,000 secured bond and sent me to jail. Well, the officers don't say anything while you're in court, but as soon as you walk out, they do. They've made snide comments several occasions because they don't understand the issue, and because the judges usually shut me down before I'm able to actually express what the issue is, or like in this case, he doesn't even address the issue at all, then it's really hard to say that I could expect them to understand, because they think they're doing their job and they think that they have jurisdiction when they don't. And so it's going to take a lot of education and a lot of pressure on them and a lot of input from people like us to be able to bridge that gap. Once I was escorted from the room, I was handcuffed and taken back to the processing room. There, an officer put me up against the wall, had me raise my hands patted me down, removed everything from my pockets, asked me to take my jacket off, told me that if I had any drugs or paraphernalia on me that it was a felony, which I thought was hilarious. Afterwards, I sat there and gave her all of my information, everything from the fact that I was self-employed and my home phone number to my husband's name and his employer and his phone number and my date of birth and the social security number that I don't use anymore, and pretty much my entire life history, to which she wrote down but then did not record in this system. After that, I was given a bracelet, and then I was taken into intake and the holding room there. The officers were very nice in taking me around the block all the way into the jail. They told me that Judge Davis had a temper and that he was a very mean judge, to quote the officer who will remain anonymous. However, he escorted me in, and then they pulled me back out of the holding cell and asked me to remove my jacket again. And then I went back into the cell, and then they said, well, since you're pregnant and we didn't realize you were here and that you were pregnant, we're going to move you to a different cell which hasn't been cleaned so that the chemicals won't bother you. And so they moved me into a different cell. Luckily it was semi-clean because the one in between was not clean at all. They took my shoes off, they checked the inside of my mouth, then they had me put flip-flops on and go remove all of my clothing in front of a female officer and take a shower. And I was put in a jumpsuit and led back to my cell. Then I was taken back after about another hour or so to the nurse who tested me for TB. She asked if I would like an HIV test, and I refused because I'm a needle phobe. And then she asked all of my pertinent pregnancy questions. I told her I was at 21 weeks and gave her my midwife's name, to which she had never heard of a thing called a midwife, and she didn't know what the heck I was talking about. The awkward part was definitely trying to use the bathroom with a jumpsuit on and having to completely undress in order to use the potty, and then having men walk by and be able to see me. Luckily, most of them averted their eyes as soon as they noticed that I was on the toilet. But there were men on the female side of intake, and that was a little awkward, especially being pregnant and trying to pee in the cup for the nurse. I had a pretty little bracelet that had my mug shot on it. She took my mug shot after she gave me my flip-flops. I asked if I could keep it afterwards, and they said, absolutely not. There's no way you're taking that out of here. Once I was told that the bondsman had posted my bail, then it was at least another hour without any human contact or any humans walking by my cell. And then I was taken upstairs by a military officer, I assume. I wasn't able to see his badge, and asked to put on my personal belongings, asked to sign a form both for bond and that I had received all of my items back except for my quarter, which they took. And then I was released to my husband and friends waiting outside. My next step is taking this to Superior Court, and I've got several court cases coming up. I've got a Superior Court case in Wilkesboro on the 12th, or sometime during that 2-week period after the 12th. I've also got another case coming up for first appearance in Wilkesboro sometime in October, I think the 20th. And so for those, it's just progressing up the line. Just like the judge today, Judge Davis had said, it's got to be a higher court than this. And so the way you get into fighting these issues is by doing something wrong. The courts are supposed to be deciding whether or not what we're talking about is truthful. So if we have to go to Supreme Court, then we will. I know Isaac is appealing to the Supreme Court at this point, who's one of our other citizens. But Superior is the next step. I knew the system was broken from the first time I voted. I knew it wasn't working, that even though I felt like my vote was counting, it wasn't really counting in the mass of things, especially thanks to the Electoral College and all that. However, when I started investigating and found John Ainsworth and Carolina Liberty, I started researching the information they were giving me, and I found it all to be factual and rooted in history and very, sort of like the Bible, very applicable to today. I decided that I was going to have to take action. I couldn't sit down and just let it go by. For the people that don't understand what's going on, then do the research. ncrepublic.org is a great place to start. Also americasremedy.com, and several other people have blogs that are all about being at liberty, which is really what it's about. Our forefathers sacrificed their lives and their sacred honor so that their posterity, which is us, could have freedom and liberty, and they are not the same thing. And what I'm fighting for is to regain that liberty by going back to lawful government instead of trying to fight a de facto system that's broken and has overturned the lawful government that we have. Just because you're pregnant does not make you immune to the government and its trampling on your rights. Last time I checked, asking for an appeal, especially when the judge says that this is over his head and it would have to go to a higher court, should be something that's assumed and not something that's punished. Being pregnant one way or the other has no effect on whether or not I'm going to be a patriot. For the men out there, if you're not willing to stand up, then the women who look to you for a lead are going to be less able to do that, less empowered. And so if we're going to take the state back, we have to do men, woman, and child alike. And for the children that are affected by this, I will be happy to tell Logan one day that I was in jail, and the baby that's on the way, that I was in jail while I was pregnant with it, because I stood up for something. And it made me very proud to know that just because I was standing up for something and ensuring my rights, that hopefully we'll be making a right step in the right direction for securing their rights when they get older.